This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh.
We're continuing to look at the shocking new Pennsylvania grand jury report that has revealed how more than 300 Catholic priests sexually abused 1,000 children and possibly thousands more over 7 decades, and that the church leadership covered up the abuse. We're joined now by two guests.
Sean Doherty is with us. He was molested by a priest from Altoona-Johnstown Diocese in Pennsylvania for 3 years, starting when he was 10 years old. The priest responsible, George Kocharczyk, has been defrocked. Even though the FBI determined he was a child predator, the priest cannot be tried as such because of expired statute of limitations. Sean Doherty's story was one of many included in the grand jury report released on Tuesday. Bob Hotzen is also with us, a former Catholic priest, co-founder and president of Road to Recovery, which assists victims of sexual abuse. We welcome you both to Democracy Now! Sean, we saw you in the clip released by the Pennsylvania Attorney General. Talk about what happened to you, how old you were, and when you blew the whistle or told anyone.
Beginning in 5th grade, my priest, my religion teacher, my Pee Wee basketball coach was Father George Kocharczyk, a well-loved young priest in our community who had been grooming me for years of getting used to him handling me physically, touching me, having him close to me. And in the 5th grade, that touching progressed to sexual assault. George Kocharczyk, to this day, I believe he must have, my belief is that he has a personal infatuation with male genitalia. I believe from the patterns and the things that he did throughout the 3 years, I believe he was testing us to see, he wanted to know the exact day that we were going to be sexually mature, in my opinion. And that progressed to one-time digital penetration in a shower when I was 13. I did not like that experience at all, and I gave him a look in the shower, and surprisingly, it ended for me that day in the shower. Unfortunately, for some of my friends, it continued for them.
Do you know how many people were involved? How many children?
He admitted to the Altoona-Johnstown grand jury to being close to 12 boys. I imagine it's a much bigger number than that.
And when did he admit this?
The report was released in March of 2016 by then Attorney General Kathleen Kane of Pennsylvania, and on pages 66 and 67 of that, my name is a redacted name, and at some point over the course of that grand jury investigation lead up to that rollout, he admitted to that, and it's in the report.
What did the church know of what he was doing? He not only groomed you,
the fun part.
He groomed your parents as well, going bowling with them.
Not just mine, not just my parents. He groomed the entire community. Since becoming public, after the report came out, reading that, I just said, I can't stay silent. Well, what drew me out was a newspaper article with him on the front page. 2 people had gone to the Bishop of Altoona-Johnstown Diocese in 2012 to call him out.
6 years ago.
Those 2 same brothers went to the then Monsignor in 1983 about Father Kocharczyk in my 8th grade year. Reported
Decades
it,
ago.
confirmed it. Monsignor went then to Bishop Hogan, covered it up, and this is first-hand experience by one of the brothers. I grew up with these guys,
Bishop
and now
Hogan,
I know that
the
Bishop Hogan
of
Altoona-Johnstown years ago made an arrangement, a financial. We need to protect the church. We need to protect the reputation. We need to protect your kids. We need to keep it quiet. And they agreed to transfer him. It took them 6 months. They didn't tell anybody. They permitted. I grew up a block from the school. It was in my 8th grade year. They didn't tell anybody. They allowed me and 3 of my friends in the rectory, in his private space, to pack his belongings. The entire top shelf of his book was all medical journals on male genitalia, right? We got in the car, drove to Portage, Pennsylvania, to the new school and to the new rectory that he was assigned to, and we spent the night in the rectory. And he had just been transferred for sexually abusing 2 boys.
What happens when a priest is caught, embezzling?
They're in jail immediately. You can't steal from the church. The church steals from you. It's not a two-way street. That is not a two-way street with the church. Money flows one direction.
Yet
and
when
if
a
you
priest
take it from them,
steals the life of a child, the dignity of a child, the church
part
protects.
of me feels that there is I mean, I can't say, Bob could probably speak more to this when he comes on, is that I have to say that there has to be a part of the church that feels that that is their benevolent right of some kind. I really just, it's starting to seem like there is a percentage of the church that feels like it is their divine right to do this. It is so systemically huge.
You mentioned earlier, and forgive me for asking, what exactly digital penetration is?
He stuck his finger in my anus in the shower when I was 13 years old. I believe he was testing to see if I would go further.
Could you talk about also the issue of the statute of limitations and what that means for survivors like yourself?
When I was a child and I was faced with this, my statutes of limitation only permitted me to talk and press charges until I was 15 years old. I had 2 years past the end of the last assault. So I was not legally old enough to drive a car in the Commonwealth of Pennsylvania, yet I had to come forward and tell my parents and the community that the guy that they bull with every Thursday night is raping the kids.
Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro emphasized how the Catholic Church delayed taking action on reports of priests engaged in child sexual abuse in order to prevent criminal charges from being filed.
The pattern was abuse, deny, and cover up. The effect not only victimized children, it served a legal purpose that church officials manipulated for their advantage. The longer they covered it up, the less chance law enforcement could prosecute these predators because the statute of limitations would run. As a direct consequence of the systematic cover-up by senior church officials, almost every instance of child sexual abuse we found is too old to be prosecuted.
That's Pennsylvania Attorney General Josh Shapiro. I want to bring a former priest into this conversation. That's right, Bob Hoetzen, former Catholic priest, president of Road to Recovery. Talk about being in the church when you were a priest and blowing the whistle.
Well, I was 40 years an insider in this church. I was 23 years in the religious life and 14 as a priest. So I saw it from the inside. I was sexually abused by 3 different men in the religious life, and I knew what was going on the inside, and it was just abject corruption from the get-go. This church is a criminal enterprise that actually covers up the massive sexual abuse of children for centuries.
Well, Bob, could you explain, respond to what Sean said earlier? I mean, you were sexually abused by 3 different men. They were all priests. Is that correct?
They were religious brothers, actually.
And what does that mean?
A religious brother is someone who lives in community, but it does not have the ability to say Mass, etc. They do more social kinds of works, like education, hospital work, etc.
And what happened to you?
Well, if the day I stepped into the religious life at the age of 18, after having graduated from high school as the top senior of my class, this person said to me, this superior said to me, "Bob, you're a cold person. I'm going to have to warm you up." He continued that mantra on for the entire year until the second superior I had in the novitiate, which is the most important year of formation because that's where you learn the spiritual life. Well, that superior sexually abused me. And then when I reported it to another superior, he told me that, yes, I was preyed upon. But that night he crept into bed and sexually assaulted me in the same way that I had described to him several hours previously.
So do you agree with what Sean suggested, that part of the church is their belief that they have some kind of benevolent right?
Oh, absolutely. What this is a massive abuse of power. And then it's exhibited in the sexual abuse of not just children, but teenagers and vulnerable adults as well. And it's also part of the reason why financial crimes are committed within the church. So every aspect of dysfunction is exhibited because of the abuse of power.
So talk about when you came forward in a big way. It wasn't actually when you were being sexually abused, though you were repeatedly.
Yes. In 2003, I testified before the New York State Legislature, and I was a priest at the time. I was directing 2 schools in the inner city of Newark, and I called for the resignation of any bishop in the United States who has covered up child sexual abuse. 3 days later, I was called into the chancery of the Newark Archdiocese and fired by my bishop for speaking out.
And they said explicitly to you that you're being fired because you spoke out?
Oh, yes. I was told that my language was too volatile at the hearing in Albany, and the bishop asked me to tone down my language. And then they slid a letter across the table at me, and it said that you're fired, effective immediately. Now, they didn't take away my priestly faculties then. But in 2005, when I turned around and sued him for doing all of these retaliatory things, then they put me on complete suspension, and I wasn't able to function as a priest at all.
Now, you blew the whistle at a Catholic high school. Explain. This
Yes.
wasn't when you were being abused,
Right.
but you felt that the, principal?
Well, having been abused as a child and also as a teenager, my antenna, has been up for a very long time. So in 1981, when I was stationed at a high school in Boston, Catholic Memorial High School, the chaplain of the school used to go into the athletic locker room with a camera. He would go into the shower room. So I saw this. I went immediately to the headmaster and I said, this has to stop. He has to be out of here. Well, he happened to be the 3rd highest ranking member of the Archdiocese of Boston at the time. He was the vice chancellor. His name was Fred Ryan. And Monsignor Fred Ryan was sexually abusing, I thought, 2 kids in particular. I went to the headmaster. I told him. The headmaster said, oh, no, he's a wonderful priest. We're not going to do anything about this. 20 years later, those 2 young men went public with their abuse. And that's really what started Road to Recovery, because I went back to Boston every week from then on to help them in their recovery. And I apologized profusely to them for not screaming more loudly in 1981.
Sean, could you elaborate on the point that Bob made? I mean, on the one hand, the scale of this grand jury report, I mean, 1,000 survivors of sexual abuse, over 300 priests implicated, and yet, obviously, there has been a massive cover-up. Could you say who you think, how many people have been responsible for that cover-up, how many people are complicit, and what you think should happen?
There's really no current way to tell how many people are involved in the cover-up. I mean, the Roman Catholic Church is a massive organization that has many hands and fingers that are willing to help. It hasn't been hard for them to find an enabling ear to bend. So that they are having a lot of help. What should happen as a result of this? These are crimes. Massive amounts of crimes have been committed, and crime deserves a punishment. Use a little of the Catholic tough love with the Catholic Church. The legislative end of this in Pennsylvania, I have been to the Capitol regularly for the last 2.5 years since becoming public to pass very common sense legislation that Representative Mark Rozzi of Berks County, also a rape victim of the church. He was raped in a shower at 13, which is why he's a representative, and he's pushing for this legislation. The Republican-controlled Senate in Pennsylvania that is dominated by lobbyists from the Insurance Federation, from the Catholic Conference, will not let it go.
What is the Insurance Federation?
The insurance agents don't want this law to go through either, because they're the ones that are going to be set foot in the bill. The church only does it. They don't pay for it.
And explain what the Catholic Conference is.
The Catholic Conference is a conference of bishops in the country that get together, even though each individual dioceses run individually by each individual bishop. They only have that control of their diocese. They do meet, and on certain aspects of the religion and activities, I believe they come to a common consensus. They argue. I think it's just like our political arena, and when they come to a consensus, that's it.
Is there something particular about Pennsylvania, or are we going to see this? This is a grand jury report just out of Pennsylvania. It's 300 priests are saying, they say 1,000 young people, children, girls and boys, but probably thousands and thousands more, the Attorney General found.
I've been told, and it's being reported, that they have over 100 calls in 12 hours to the hotline since it's been released. This is an open investigation. It is on continuing. I believe those numbers are very conservative.
And yet, where is Pope Francis on all of this? Pressure is growing. He hasn't responded. The church sex scandals continue to grow across the globe. I'm talking about sex abuse scandals. Earlier this week, former Australian Archbishop Philip Edward Wilson was sentenced to 12 months of house arrest. He's the most senior Catholic official in the world to be found guilty of concealing the sexual abuse of children. That was Australia. In late July, the former Archbishop of Washington, D.C., Cardinal Theodore McCarrick, became the highest-ranking Catholic leader in the United States to resign after he was accused of abusing a number of boys as young as 11 years old. Meanwhile, Tuesday, authorities in Chile raided the headquarters of the Catholic Church's Episcopal Conference as part of a widespread investigation into sex abuse. Well, former Father Bob, what is your response?
Well, just anecdotally, in 1994, when I was considering leaving the Irish Christian Brothers and going to be a priest, I asked the vocation director in the Newark Archdiocese, has Archbishop McCarrick stopped sleeping with the seminarians? It was known by everyone. And he assured me that he had, and that the papal nuncio and that another bishop had intervened and stopped it. But what we're talking about here is it's worldwide. It's not going to stop unless the outside agencies, like the federal governments, 2 years ago, 32 organizations led by Road to Recovery and Catholic whistleblowers approached the Obama administration and pleaded for a national commission to investigate the Catholic Church's clergy sexual abuse problem. We didn't get anywhere, but we're still doing these kinds of things. Australia, the Royal Commission was an absolute gem. It's going to be a seminal work in the history of child protection. We need to do the same thing in the United States.
And what do you expect? Do you think that the Vatican will respond, Sean?
I think eventually they're going to have to respond in that, and I think the politicians are going to have to respond. Let's keep in mind, this is a very damning report that was exposed. They were successful at redacting 30 names. Every diocese in Pennsylvania...
Of the priests.
Of the priests. Every diocese in Pennsylvania is exposed, right? So if you're a Pennsylvanian, listen to this, and you have young daughters or young boys, I can't tell you where in Pennsylvania those 30 people are right now. The only way we can do that is if we pass Mark Rozzi's legislation, because those 30 are going to argue before the Supreme Court. The Catholic Church and those 30 are going to be hidden unless the Supreme Court releases those names. So there's no telling where these 30 guys are operating in Pennsylvania.
You compare the treatment of these rapists and the cover-up of them to, the National Catholic Reporter 2010. A Catholic nun who is a member of a Phoenix Catholic Hospital's ethics committee was excommunicated and reassigned last week for a role in allowing an abortion to take place in a hospital, the surgery considered necessary to save the life of a critically ill patient. You compare it to that, and you think about the other stories that were told. For example, this was in the Pennsylvania Attorney General's report. Ex-priest Edward Ganster left the priesthood in 1990, moved to Orlando, Florida area, and went on to work at Disney World before he died in 2014. And how is that connected to the Catholic Church? He got a letter of recommendation from the Catholic Church.
Yeah,
Father Hodson.
This is systemic. It's when Governor Frank Keating resigned as the chair of the first National Review Board that was set up after the Dallas Charter was passed in 2002, he resigned and said, this is exactly what the mafia is like. It's dealing with the mafia, and that's what we're dealing with. And we have to make sure that Catholics now take back their church and insist that these people are eliminated, fired. And that's what the Pope has to do. He has to have mass firings of bishops, and the leadership has to change. And that, of course, leads then to the structural changes that need to be made. Things like mandatory celibacy, which is absurd. And in 2018, the fact that we still have some of these traditions in place.
And what about nuns as priests?
Of course, women have to have full participation in the church. If women were in leadership positions, this never would have happened.
For parents?
I'd like to go one step further. Not only leadership positions, power, position of power. If a woman that is celibate on level heading as a priest, a nun is not on level heading as a priest in the eyes of the church. But in the eyes of the church, if a nun feels, I'm not saying on the outside, within herself feels that she is on equal footing with this priest, there's nothing to prevent her from saying, hey, what's going on here? This is no more. Like they did to us. The nuns are excellent at it, let me tell you. I grew up with nuns, and they're good at policing, but they only have so much power. You know, you can't police the priests if you have less power.
Well, we want to thank you both for being with us, for sharing your stories, for responding to this report, and of course, we'll continue to cover this story. This is one state, Pennsylvania. Do you know of other states that are doing this kind of investigation?
Here. We're sitting in one of the worst.
New York.
Absolutely, and we have the most archaic laws here. We're equal to Mississippi and Alabama as far as our statutes of limitation in New York go. Plus, I will tell you, we have Times Square, St. Patrick's Cathedral, Niagara Falls. These guys work just like single guys. They bring them across state lines. Let's go to New York. I'll take you to St. Patrick's. I'll take you to a Broadway show. We'll go to Niagara Falls. And you'll be sexually abused, but it'll be okay. You'll have a great time. We'll get you a I Love New York hat, and we'll take you home to your family.
We need 49 more grand jury investigations is what we need.
In all the states. Sean Doherty, survivor of sexual abuse by a Pennsylvania priest, and former Catholic priest Bob Hodson, president of Road to Recovery. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the War and Peace Report. When we come back, meet, well, who could be the first Muslim woman member of Congress. We're going to Detroit to speak with Rashida Tlaib. Stay with us.